This week on To the Contrary.
First, protecting your digital privacy while female. Then, Joe Biden's woman problem, what the latest polls show. Behind the headlines, what is marriage fundamentalism and how it impacts non-traditional families and American society.
Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, is the internet safe for women?
The internet is alternatively referred to as the Wild West, rife with stalkers, insane people acting out, and others harvesting private information to make it public. According to the New York Times, several studies have found that women are more concerned about privacy risks online than men. Women also experience the internet differently, according to a Pew study, finding that women are far more likely to be sexually harassed online and describe these interactions as extremely upsetting. The Department of Justice reports some 75% of the victims of stalking and cyberstalking are women. Social media companies have become increasingly aggressive at harvesting personal information, then getting hacked, so it ends up in the hands of people using it to commit cyber crimes. That includes hacking women's identity. With Congress considering new privacy regulations, women's concerns should be taken into account. California has a new cyber privacy law, but some say it doesn't go far enough for women. In the event of a data breach, it gives consumers the right to sue if certain kinds of information, such as Social Security numbers or driver's license numbers, are compromised. Some believe electing more women to Congress will make federal privacy laws more protective.
So, Deborah Carnahan, is the answer to cybersecurity electing more women to Congress?
It's one of the answers, Bonnie. That's what we need to do to get started here.
No, not unless they're going to be pushing for laws like the EU's privacy laws, which are, really flawed and don't necessarily help women any more than that.
Well, I think they need to elect legislators who actually understand technology and the impact that technology has on privacy.
And does that include a lot of women?
It includes women, but it's not exclusive to women.
I want more women in office, but I'm not sure that this problem is going to be solved necessarily just because of someone's gender.
All right, now let's get back to your comment. The EU, you're opposed to the EU's law, which goes much farther than what the U.S. Congress would do. Why are you opposed? The EU is supposed to have the best in the world, better than Californians.
The most stringent, the strongest, sure. Not necessarily the best when you look at how it's really strengthened big tech companies like Google, Apple, who really, locked out competition and are able to, afford the compliance cost with the regulations.
So they pay the fines. And
they're able to pay the fines. They're able to make sure that they're in compliance with what the law, became. But it didn't necessarily increase the amount of trust that people have in online companies anymore, or with what they do with their data. And it also locked out a lot of competition in smaller websites, from news agencies to shopping sites that people who live overseas were used to seeing. So there are a lot of unintended consequences that I don't think really make that using the EU model worthwhile for here in the United States.
Look, I come out of the domestic violence and sexual assault community, which programs across the country have long counseled women on scrubbing their social media identity, on protecting voter registration and other aspects of their privacy. Some places that's written into law, but in a lot of places it's very flawed and leaves women very vulnerable. And so I think we actually do need to set some standards by which people who need protection can get the protection that they need and the privacy that they need.
Prosecution of abusers?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, so many women are subject to cyber stalking that then becomes real stalking that then becomes violence. And so I think it's incredibly necessary. And I know the advocacy community has long supported increase protections for women who've already demonstrated that they're vulnerable.
That's one of the things I was going to say. It's a good start with women in Congress, but we need more women judges. We need to have more women prosecutors, and we also need to have training for our police and law enforcement officials. And
what about women in high tech who can sort through these problems?
Exactly, because they're right there at the table.
And I think there's some instances, for instance, I read one story about a woman who was using a ride-sharing app, got into the car and then saw her name was displayed, and then another passenger was able to find out who she was. So those are some instances
and
where
the woman who got into a Lyft car and was murdered. I believe it was Lyft, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think so. There are instances certainly where we need government and we need industry to be better stewards and to clamp down. And I think it's also, though, a reminder of what privacy is. And we've sort of gotten to this brave new world where we share everything, and we've forgotten that sometimes there's things that it's good to keep to ourselves. There was a time, we'll remember, where sort of exposing your whole world to the public was actually a punishment. You think sort of the scarlet letter, right? We don't want to necessarily share our most intimate moments with the whole world, and we have gotten to a world where we're sort of comfortable doing that, and then we forget how vulnerable that can make us. So there's a lot of different things that we can all be doing.
Well, and I think you're talking about...
in a sense, though, is it too late? Is the genie out of the bottle?
Well, yeah. I mean, you're talking about personal responsibility in some ways. In some ways, what we're willing to trade for 10% off our first purchase, or giving away our telephone number just so that we can get an exclusive on a new Celine purse that's coming out 50% off. So I mean, we have to take responsibility as consumers and say, okay, what am I willing to give up? Who has what I have? How can I get it back? And then moving forward, there's probably a little bit of an educational component here when we think about just like we should be doing financial literacy in K through 12, we should also be teaching our children, this is what you're giving up when you're going to download this app so you can talk to your friends about this and that. And I think that's a missing element.
The kids, I mean, before the brain is fully developed as teenagers, preteens, they do all kinds of stuff that, if it's still online when they're looking for work or trying to get into college, is not going to serve them well. What do you do about that?
Yeah, I really agree with you on the educational component. I hate to always put more things on schools and on teachers, but I think this is very, very important. This can just ruin people's lives forever and ever and ever, and they don't understand. I mean, even as an adult, I don't understand all of it and what's out there, what people can do with my information. I don't think any of us really have a complete
what someone
grasp.
suggested to me, and I've been doing it, quite honestly, when these stupid companies ask you for your birthday, and I give them the wrong birthday, I give them the wrong cell phone number, and I give them the wrong Social Security. Let them have it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people do that, and it's about trying to balance the convenience of the technology with the protection of your privacy. And I think that's a tough balance to strike in a world that is increasingly reliant on the technology.
And increasingly, companies are grubby about stealing it from you.
And using it.
Let us know what or worse, getting hacked.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay. From online privacy and harassment to Joe Biden's woman problem.
Several women's allegations that former Vice President and U.S. Senator Joe Biden touched them, even kissed their foreheads, making them feel uncomfortable and nervous, don't appear to be hurting his standing among Democratic voters. The percentage of people choosing Biden as first for the Democratic nomination, even though he has yet to announce, has basically stayed the same in Morning Consult's weekly tracking poll. After week-long constant coverage of the accusations, Biden still leads the Democratic field. According to the survey, some 32% of Democrats favor Biden among the 2020 Democratic candidates. That is essentially unchanged from 33% a week earlier. The Morning Consult poll shows Biden still enjoys the support of 33% of women voters and 39% of black voters, but his supporters skew older and more moderate.
So, Donna Edwards, does this mean Joe Biden got off, to use a cliche, scot-free? And should he have?
Well, I think got off from what? I mean, I do the hair salon test, and in my hair salon, the women were saying, it doesn't bother me. And these are women who are voters. And look, as somebody who has been pecked on the forehead by Joe Biden, I think that women and men are able to make the distinction between that and the President of the United States grabbing women where he shouldn't. And I think that's what you see here. And so, my question is Joe Biden going to be able to mount a campaign in the way that he knows and is comfortable and still respect the boundaries that are the new lines that he believes have been drawn for him and I think are appropriate?
Is it just a matter of age? Is that can you blame that, or is this something he should have known? I mean, obviously, it doesn't amount to sexual assault. It doesn't amount to any of that stuff. It just amounts to really bad taste and, quite frankly, stupidity on some level, because you don't do that to people.
Right. I mean, I think this is sort of just common courtesy, right? But it's perhaps, I'd like to think that this is a moment where we're all saying, okay, maybe we've taken some of this too far. Let's not go to extremes. But I also suspect that, Joe Biden is a really affable guy. Lots of Democrats like him, Republicans like him. Other than some ideas about Amtrak, I think he's not the worst politician we have out there. And I think people want to like him, right? And so he doesn't seem as bad. And I think that there's, if this were a Republican, he might not come out totally unscathed in the same way. Because looking at Quinnipiac, looking at Change Research, looking at the Morning Consult poll, he's still far ahead of Bernie Sanders, for instance, Kamala Harris. So there's a lot to be said for just being a nice guy that people like.
Well, full disclosure, I've been hugged and kissed a lot by him. and I was never offended. That doesn't mean somebody else might not be that doesn't have that relationship.
So these women, you think, were picking nits?
I think it is a little bit nitpicky going on. And also, full disclosure, my mother-in-law, who is a senator with Joe Biden, actually tweeted out 8 tweets last week. It was picked up by the Washington Post, the New York Times, and I was really worried she was going to get some really bad blowback on that. And it was not. The support that came in, and what she said was, I appreciated it when I went to the Senate at a hard time, losing my husband and my son. He had done the same, and he gave me the human touch, and I appreciated that human touch. And she describes it as human, and I think it is the human touch. However, having said that, now that he has seen this and heard from these women and kind of had a chance to reflect, I think he needs to draw some personal boundaries for those women that he is around and respect those, because it is a different time.
I have heard that Andrew Cuomo, New York governor, who's thinking about running and who may jump in at some point, he will not have a meeting in his office, kind of like Pence, unfortunately, but with a woman, without somebody else there. He wants he's not going to do anything, and he wants proof of that.
And that's the danger we're in.
That is ridiculous. And what it does is it really undermines women and our capacity and our equality. And I mean, I don't think it's great for Mike Pence, and I don't think it's great for Andrew Cuomo.
Well, unfortunately, this is an unintended consequence of the Me Too movement. I think it's been powerful that victims have been able to come forward, but this is also what has happened, where men don't feel comfortable having younger women around them. And it shouldn't be the case, but that's where we're at. Now, I will say with Joe Biden, though, I think it's very interesting that he was such a campus sexual assault champion in terms of President Obama's regulations, and now he wanted to take away due process, take away the presumption of innocence on the part of people who've been accused of something. But in this situation, he wants everybody to be understanding towards him. So, I kind of saw a little bit of his
sexual assault.
It really is, and most of it was done on a podium in front of thousands of people.
And my first exposure to Joe Biden was working with him in 1994 to pass the Violence Against Women Act, which then led to the Campus Sexual Assault Act. I mean, I think that he has, serious gravitas as a legislator, and I think that what voters are saying is they want to get to that discussion, and they're not taking this seriously.
We have a tiny bit of time left. When you look at the Morning Consult poll, 4 white guys at the top of the list of Democratic contenders. And yet we have all these women of color. Kamala Harris was mentioned, and the senator from New York, and all the Elizabeth Warren. Why are the Democratic voters? I mean, is this a year when they're going to need to nominate a white man to get independence, because maybe, some of the public after Obama are wary of people of color, wary of women as president?
Perhaps it's just a
I don't know. I mean, I look at this field and I'm very disappointed, frankly, with the media, because they have elevated some of these candidates because they think it's a personality contest. And if you look at the policy proposals that Elizabeth Warren has put out, that Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, these are serious proposals to move the country forward, and they haven't been covered.
And yet they're not getting as much publicity as the mayor, former mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Thank you very much. Behind the headlines, marriage fundamentalism. According to the think tank Family Story, the phrase means placing value on the traditional married two-parent family with kids as the best model of family for American society. But the organization's new report challenges this notion and calls for family justice and equity for all families, not just the traditional model.
It's both caused a lot of harm in ways that we're not always immediately aware of. And I think it's actually based on, when you kind of get down into it, some relatively racist, sexist, classist notions about family.
Nicole Rogers founded Family Story, a think tank that just released a new report called The Case Against Marriage Fundamentalism. Rogers says the superiority of the two-parent family is a myth promoted by conservative institutions. Naomi Schaefer, who works for one of those institutions, the American Enterprise Institute, says it's not a myth.
We've seen a lot of studies that look at the effects for children of living either with a single parent or living with a cohabiting couple, and often the effects are detrimental to children's development.
Rogers says the research is not nearly that conclusive.
The scientific consensus about whether children do best with two married parents is not nearly as strong as people think. We all know intuitively that having, the more adults that care about and can support emotionally, financially, every way a child, the better. That's all good for children.
Rogers says families come in all shapes and sizes now. Using the traditional model no longer makes sense from a public policy perspective. One example, she says, is federal marriage promotion programs like the Healthy Marriage Initiative, started under President George W. Bush, as well as similar programs that followed it. Despite more than $1 billion spent, those programs have not increased marriage rates.
What's really important to understand is that's not because low-income people don't know how to do relationships as well as the rest of us, which is sort of this very insulting notion behind a lot of marriage promotion and all of that. When you're struggling financially, when systems are basically built to not level the playing field for you, marriage is a lot harder to access for a variety of reasons.
The percentage of married Americans had held steady at 80% until 1950. During the last 70 years, it has steadily declined to 48%, creating an unmarried majority.
It has completely become a mark of privilege in the past decade or so. It is just the case that if you are less educated and lower income, you're less likely to be married.
You have the upper classes of society have continued to get married and have continued to be able to provide all of the benefits of marriage to their children. That stability, that economic level of security. And meanwhile, you have the lower half of society has been taught for some reason that marriage is not important. And as a result, they're not getting to reap the same benefits that upper class America is reaping.
Schaefer and Rogers agree marriage and privilege are linked, but Rogers says the problem is our public policies remain stuck in the 1950s. They support families with a male breadwinner and a dependent wife and children.
How do we support people given that they're not getting married to the same degree that they used to, given that they're having children without being married, given that they're getting married later in life if they get married at all?
Rogers stresses the report is not anti-marriage, but says we need to accept that marriage is not the solution to the problems of poverty and inequality. She says it's just important to redefine family and create systems that keep up with the changes in society. Family Story says it's seeking family justice and equality for all families.
For instance, when it comes to something like paid family leave, why is it that if I'm married and, raising a child and my husband gets sick, that I can take paid leave to care for him? But if I'm raising a child and I live with my aunt and she's raising a child with me and we are our family, we live in this house, we support each other, she gets sick, I can't take paid leave for her. Who does that benefit? It leaves a ton of people out. It doesn't reflect what families look like. And I think it just harms all of us.
So should non-traditional family members be allowed to get any kind of federal benefits? Should they be able, beyond just being able to say, for example, okay, if I'm dying, you decide whether I get more treatment or not? That seems an obvious one, but let's talk for the moment about where the federal government kicks in money. Is that something that people you're not married to or aren't part of your what's considered the traditional core marriage should be getting those benefits?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of a gray area. I've thought a lot about this issue because certainly I know lots of families who don't look just like mine, and I think that they're good, loving families. I think that when we think about marriage, I'm more in line with Naomi Schaefer-Riley because I think we look at it from the macro perspective, and over a long period of time, we've seen that this is a successful institution that provides stability and for hopefully happiness for a lot of people. That doesn't mean that it's the only option out there or the only structure. I think where I take some issue with Nicole is that I actually don't think that all of our public policies are marriage focused. In fact, I think that a lot of our policies are at odds with marriage. Take the mass incarceration we have right now, which is absolutely destroying communities and destroying that ability to have successful families. So I do think that there's a lot that we can do, but I don't think we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
I was going to say, I think that most of our policies are geared towards married couples. And I think a lot of our laws have been geared towards married couples. And if you look back when birth control was first changed back in 1963, Griswold versus Connecticut, it used to be that a woman had to go to her husband to get birth control and get permission. The doctor would go there and say, can I give your wife birth control? Because the government has an interest in couples staying married. And so that permeates our entire system, not just the legislative branch, but the judiciary branch as well.
I don't feel that government propaganda will ever be, anything teenagers hear from a federal program, they're not going to listen to. That all that money they gave to churches, they should have given it to Cardi B and asked her to go out, give her $1 billion and ask her to tell kids to please get married before they have children. It would have been a lot more effective.
Right. Yeah, but I do think that we're trying to say, should the government be the stick then that says get married and follow this way because we'll help you? Or should we address the needs of the trends that are happening in our society?
I think we've been trying to address those needs for quite a long time. Let's actually get to the root of the problem. I mean, I'm going to talk about the communities of color, where when you look at Asian families, they tend to follow the success series of getting married, getting educated, getting married, and having children. And they continue to build, amass wealth, buy property.
Although they also have, that's also in some ways not actually true. There's a lot of Asian poverty as well in this country.
There is, but when you compare their experience to the black experience, I think you see differences. And even within the black community, there's a difference between black immigrant families versus black those whose ancestors are in this country. So I'm with Sabrina here. I say we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And there are some government policies that actually don't support marriage, like when we look at our welfare programs. And I think there's a really interesting correlation between when we see the decline in marriage versus an increase in welfare programs. And I think that wasn't addressed by Ms. Nicole.
Well, I think I'm the only unmarried person at the table, and proud to be part of that majority. And I think that our public policy needs to begin to reflect that when it comes to child rearing, to to caretaking and caregiving, that our policies are stuck in the 1950s, and 2019 and the 2000s requires something different to reflect the way our families really experience their everyday lives and their work lives. More women in the workforce, more unmarried women who are participating in the economy, and our public policy doesn't embrace them at all.
Well, I would certainly agree with you there, and many times on this show I think I've talked about this is exactly why I think we want to have less government and more individual control over some of these resources, so that if you are a single mom, for instance, you can have control over your paid leave resources, or if you are a gay couple with a child and you don't fit this government-run mold, that you can still have flexibility and opportunities.
All right, that's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.